everyone. Today I'm going to review Nothing by Jane Taylor. It is a very short novel and I have not heard many people talk about it here on BookTube. I had to look for reviews on this novel in order to know what other people thought of it. So this is supposed to be a young adult book. I think it's very different from what I understand as a young adult book. This one is, for example, I usually think that YA books have romance, at least a little bit of it. And usually the characters, from my understanding, are meant to be role models of some sort. Or, you're meant to look, at least at some of them, as role models. And that's something that doesn't happen in this story. And also the subject matter is a bit weird, not really one that I usually recognize in young adult books, but it makes sense because it's usually things that I imagine the other things that teenagers would have issues with. The main characters are, they make decisions that are not necessarily ethical, and the author recognizes them as unethical. So you as the reader, you're not meant to think that those things are good and that sort of thing. And they're very blatantly wrong. I mean, there's basically no, well, I don't know how to word that, but let me just say that these things are, it's kind of an exploitation film, I think, but in a novel format. The first time that I filmed this video, I thought that the characters, that the storyline could be seen as exploitative, but it's not. And now I realize that it is kind of exploitative, and that the characters are, that the author is really pushing the boundaries, and at some point it really is kind of shocking for the sake of being shocking, even though it does have a purpose in the story. But I still find that it's trying to be especially violent at some points. But anyway, in terms of the review itself, I can say, in terms of the writing style, it's very simple and very straightforward, except for a couple of phrases that seem to be trying to be poetic, and they seem a bit out of place, I would say. But that's pretty much the only flaw that I find. So I think that in writing style, I would still give it a full star. And in terms of the plot or the storyline, again, I would give it a, like I said, I had some issues with it because it does seem to be, first of all, it's not exactly realistic. It does that thing in which the teenagers they're not really controlled in any way by adults. Like adults in this universe, in this story, they never start to get intrigued by what they are doing. So the story is more or less about these children who, they're in middle school, and one of them one day realizes that life is meaningless and a bunch of other shit like that. Basically he just stands up one day in class and he's like, life is meaningless, I don't want to go to school anymore, or rather there's no point in going to school anymore. And the other kids are trying to basically bully him into being convinced that there is a meaning and that sort of thing, because they start to be, they don't recognize it, I don't think, but they start to be worried about the possibility of this guy being right. So they start to get really violent and really aggressive about the whole concept of meaning, and they take it to very unethical extremes, like I said. And that whole process of them doing these things went on for months, if I remember correctly. So it's very unrealistic that these adults just didn't realize for all that time that their children were doing something. They were sneaking out at night and that sort of thing. But that's a really minor issue. The bigger one is really the whole disturbing aspect of the book, which is the things that these kids are trying to do, the things that they do and the things that they intend to do. at many points are really questionable, to say the least. I mean, they pretty much rape one of them at some point. So, and they do other things. I mean, they do other things that are just really straight up wrong. They kill a dog. They do things. I mean, I don't consider these spoilers. If anything, they're more warnings. I think that it's very possible that this author could have gotten a point across without resorting to, shocking things. And I think that it makes sense. I understand if someone found it cheap to, have these things happen, even if it wasn't necessary, because it's actually unrealistic as well to have children do things like that because of a philosophical issue, or, because of existentialist threat or whatever. So the first time that I reviewed this book on Goodreads, I said that it wasn't exploitative, and I really was wondering why so many people were, so to speak, getting offended at the things that happened in the book and just saying that the book was bad because it was disturbing or something like that. First of all, I don't think a book can be bad because it's disturbing. I mean, there has to be, if you think it's more disturbing than it needs to be, or if you think it's disturbing just to be manipulative or whatever, then that's kind of a point. But just a book making you feel disturbed is not really a flaw. I think it's not a valid reason to give it a bad rating or something like that. But I digress. So I do think that the plot and the storyline were handled not in the best way. And let me tell you, especially because the characters were not, I mean, this is the next point anyway, but the story doesn't have enough of a heart for the violence and things like that to be that interesting. So I think the fatal flaw of this book is that it's not deep enough emotionally to make up for how violent it is. And I guess that's really the flaw, as opposed to just being disturbing. And the next thing, so I give it a half star, let's say, for plot and storyline. In terms of the characters, that's the other kind of flaw. They were different enough. I mean, they were different people, and they had different motivations and families and that kind of thing. But there was a point in which I think that it kind of blurred together, and again, there wasn't that much emotional depth with them. We didn't connect that much with them. In a way, I didn't really care what happened to most of them. I kind of cared about the main character who was narrating the story, but everyone else was, and also the girl who was raped, but everyone else is just not that easy to connect to. I don't care that much, and I think that most people wouldn't care that much what happens to those other characters, so that's a flaw. So I would give characters a half star again. So for depth, I am giving it a full star. I know that I just said that the sheer level of violence is kind of unnecessary, but I think that it's interesting that it does try to it is trying to propose something. I think it has a kind of ambiguous ending, and it's kind of hard to see what it's trying to tell you, what the author's trying to tell you. But I think that if I had to guess, it would be the fact that maybe we should stop trying to find meaning where there doesn't need to be, and that we should rather enjoy life and that sort of thing. So I think Jane Taylor does believe in a way that there is no meaning, and that life is kind of pointless at the end of it all, because I think that she might have been projecting through that character who was proposing that. Something else that I found is that there's a concept here that is applied. It is I don't actually know what the name of the concept itself is, but Hannah Arendt at some point said something about modern education and how children of those times were being educated in this way in which adults weren't really their main authority. So instead of being under their, protection or authority, they were under the authority of their own peer groups. So that's basically what happens in this case in books like Lord of the Flies, in which it's kind of a democratic it's kind of a democracy. So what these kids did in this book, Nothing, it was kind of agreed that they had to act a certain way, do certain things because as a group they had decided that it had to happen, even if they were unethical. So it really is kind of a democracy, and there is no adults interfering in that whole process. So I think it shows the concept of children being under the tyranny of themselves as a group and not being protected by adults that would or wouldn't care about them, I guess. And so, like I said, I give it a full star for depth. And my personal feelings towards the story, which is the last point, again, I give it a half star because I would not reread this book. I don't think it has that much to offer in terms of being a good story. But I think if you like existentialist books and you want a quick read, this is a good book. And it impressed me because it's very different from what I understand as a YA novel. Because usually, I probably will sound snobbish, but I usually see them as, like an easy to read kind of novel that's not necessarily made to make you think too much, at least not in the case of contemporary, which is, this one is YA contemporary. So I don't know, it was different from what I expected. It definitely exceeded my expectations, even though I didn't expect it to be, even though I still don't think it's that good, it still is better than I thought it would be. So that's something that usually doesn't happen. So yeah. So I would recommend it in a way. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you have read this book, definitely tell me what you think of it and what you think of my review of it. So thanks for watching.